Hey, and welcome to the Agency Agreements course. This course, we're going to cover how to write the listing agreement, buyer agency agreement, and working with real estate agents form, and just talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls and how we want to fill this out. So I would highly recommend before you start this video that you go ahead and get out an actual listing agreement and a buyer agency agreement that you could fill out as we go through this together. And I'm going to be talking about some of the little issues involved, but we're going to fill these out together. So let's get started. All right. So here we are in the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. The first thing we need to do is fill out the seller name. Okay. So it's the interesting part here is that if it is a married couple, you have to have both sides signing this, right? So it'd be Aaron Kraft and Elizabeth Kraft if I was selling my own property, right? Because I'm married, and so Beth has full rights to sell the property, and we would need both of us to sign it. Now, the interesting thing is sometimes people get separated or divorced, and they say, "Well, no, we've been separated for 30 years. No big deal. Just I need to be on the contract. She doesn't need to sign it." That's not true. So unless there anytime a separation or a divorce is in play, you need to chat with their attorney and make sure that you have the right names on there. Unless they are officially divorced and there is a divorce decree saying that this property is now just Beth's or just Aaron's. Other than that, you would need to have both of them sign it. Okay, so that's a little pitfall there. The other thing that could be an issue is making sure if it's in an LLC that it would be in the LLC name. All right. So sometimes on investment properties or things like that, there's an LLC. Sometimes there's an estate. When there's an estate issue, I highly recommend just talking to the estate attorney, finding out how they want it read in the listing agreement. But it may be something like Aaron Kraft State. It could be Aaron Kraft as executor of Joe Smith's estate. It could be something like that. All right. But for most of the time, it's going to be just the people involved. So let's just fill this out like this. There could also be, there's oftentimes we're dealing with one in the office right now with a property that is now owned by all the brothers and sisters, and there's like 5 brothers and sisters, but wait, they're all married, so it ends up being like 10 signatures on the property. Okay, so anybody that's involved needs to sign it, and all of their spouses need to sign the listing agreement as well. All right, of course they need to sign all the paperwork, but just making sure on a purchase, you just like I could buy something as a buyer, I could buy something without Beth knowing about it, but there's no way I could sell it without her signing. All right, so just be careful on the name factor there. Okay. All right, listing firm will be in the name of Weichert Realtors Unlimited. All right, you don't need to put your name in there. You shouldn't put your name in there. It should always just be Weichert Realtors Unlimited. Listings and agency agreements are always taken in the name of the firm, right? Okay, so moving on. The term of the agreement. Usually you're going to check off the first block that says this is the effective date of the agreement, the date that it's been signed. There could be the chance where there's a property that's currently listed with another firm and you won't be able to purchase it until, you won't be able to list it until that listing agreement is expired. So in that case, you would, in fact, check that box off and put the current date that it would expire, okay? Most of the time, though, it'll be your effective date. All right. What's the expiration date? So as a firm, we want our listings to go out for 6 months. So we're on April 16th here today. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we go October 16th, 2020. That's the typical expiration date. For land, I prefer to do a year. When you're presenting this to a seller, I would just pre-fill this out and not say much about it. It's there. So the expiration date will be 10/16 and moving on. And if they have an argument about that, we'll discuss it, but we need to not have short listing agreements because you need the opportunity to invest in the property, invest your time, invest your money, advertising dollars, and so typically we need that 6 months. Now, if it's a really nice property that I think is going to sell pretty quickly, and I just have a good feeling about my seller, and they are seem to be really nice, but they got burned in the past from someone else, then maybe I'll negotiate that a little bit if I feel good about it. But otherwise, we need to leave those at 6 months. Okay. All right. The next part is identifying the property that we're selling. What the heck are we selling, right? So you need to have at least 3 ways to identify the property. So we can put in 123 Main Street here, and let's say that's in Asheville, say 28805 in Buncombe County, right? So that's one way to identify the property. But we have to have 2 other ways to identify it. Typically, you'll have the deed page. Might be say 123 and then 7890, something like that, would be the deed book, and then the page. And we almost always have the PIN, right? You can always find the PIN on the tax records, things like that. So let's just say that's something like this. All right, so that's our PIN number right there. You don't have to fill out more than that. You just need 3 ways to identify the property. So that's 1, 2, 3 ways. We're good. Usually in our area, you won't find the plat book and page. Sometimes you will, but not always. You won't find the plat reference all the time. So don't worry about it if you can't find that. If you do have it, great. Put that in, wonderful. But just so you know, you won't usually find those, but you will always find the PIN and the deed book page and the address. All right. Now, quick note here. Really important that you make sure to advertise, or I'm sorry, to put into the contract what exactly you're selling. So if you are just selling this property, it's a normal property, that's typically what you're going to fill out. But what if there's another PIN number? Maybe this is the house, and then right next door to it is another PIN number of a quarter-acre lot that is also going with the property. If that's the case, you would need to have this PIN number and the other PIN number in there, right? And then in addition, I would use the other description and say 0.25 acre lot to the left of the house. And then you'd have the other deed book, the 1237890, and then the N 345, and whatever the next one is, right? So just make sure you just add those extra parcels in there when that situation is taking place. Just be sure this document is between the firm and the seller. So we can write whatever we need to in there. Just go as deep as you need to. If it's really hard to understand, maybe you just say see addenda A, and then you have a separate document titled Addenda A that shows maybe a plat or a GIS map or something where it's all labeled in there correctly. So you do whatever you got to do to identify the property. Okay. All right. But typically, you're just going to do address, PIN number, deed book, and page. But it is critical if there's additional lots or something that you identify those. All right. Now you're going to have your signatures and then the sellers here. You can sign these documents. I've had questions from new agents saying, well, do I need Aaron or somebody from the office to sign this? No, you can sign as the agent. You're an agent for the firm, so you have authority to sign that. All right. We got the fixtures and exclusions. This is one of those forms that, yes, you can have your seller sign this in dot loop, but this is one of those forms that's much easier and better to go ahead and just sign in person if you can. because it gives you a chance to go through all of this sort of stuff together and make sure that if there's any fixtures or things that they want to keep, that they have that opportunity to do that. Okay. So is there any items leased or not owned? So those might be fuel tanks, antenna, satellite dishes, anything like that. If there is, then we need to type that in here. If not, we need to put none. All right, don't leave these blank. There should be none or NA in there. If there isn't any, if there is, then just name them. The fuel tank, the antenna, satellite dish, whatever. Okay. Other items that don't convey, anything else in the property that you guys are going to leave and I'm sorry, that you're going to take with you and not leave for the buyer. So is there any of those chandeliers that's hanging that you want to take with you? Are there any trees that you want to take with you? I have had a lot of people ask to take some plants, some flowers, some trees. They get attached to them and they want to take them with them. So if that's the case, that's fine, no big deal. But we need to know that, and we need to make sure to identify that here in the listing agreement. Okay. But then again, if there's none, then we need to type in here none. Okay. All right. Personal property. What personal property are we going to leave? And oftentimes in this case, people say, well, I don't know. We might leave the refrigerator. We might leave the washer dryer. We're not sure about the washer dryer right now, but we do want to leave the refrigerator, but we're not sure about the washer dryer. In that case, I would leave this as just the refrigerator, because this is an agreement between the firm and the seller, and we're just trying to find out what it is they want us to advertise. So if they want us to advertise that the refrigerator goes with the property, great. If they're like, hey, washer and dryer are negotiable, that's fine, but we don't need to put that in here, because this says that following personal property shall be transferred to the buyer at no value. So if they want value for those things, then that's something that we can still advertise for them, but not just, hey, they're going with the property. Okay. So make sure we're labeling those correctly, and then we actually put those into the multiple listing service. Okay. Home warranty. The seller agrees or does not agree to get a home warranty, not to exceed what price. I typically would put in there $550 unless there's some extras that they're adding to that. We don't collect a fee as the office, so that'd be a 0. Just a quick reference there. The home warranty is completely free for the seller from the time we call it in until closing. And so it might be a really good idea to offer that on every single every single seller that you list with, and just say, hey, look, I can get you a free home warranty from now until we close, and this at closing, then you would buy the home warranty for the buyer, depending on the property, but it's a good way to ensure or give some trust and some faith to the buyer that they won't have to worry about um, any of those mechanics of the house for at least that first year. So that might be a good idea to get in the habit of doing, and making sure that we're offering it to every buyer and seller. Okay. All right. The listing price. What's the listing price going to be? Whatever you guys decide on based on your comparables. Whole other class, obviously, on that, as well as how to talk about price. But don't just say, hey, what do you want to list it for? Make sure you before you say where do you want to list it, you have that full pricing conversation with them, and you've laid out where you think you need to be, so that it's not just a, hey, where do you want to go list at? Like, there needs to be a true conversation there based on facts and statistics. Okay. So then we go into what kind of loan are they going to be able to, are they going to be willing to accept? Doesn't mean they can't accept something if they don't check this. It just means per our contract with them, what do we want to advertise? So, I mean, cash, obviously always should be checked. I don't know a reason why that shouldn't ever be checked, but cash, in this case, if we're listed at 550, we're probably outside the range for some of the other issues. We're in 28805, so most of 28805 is not USDA compliant. So in this case, maybe we just check cash and conventional. But if you do think it qualifies for the others, then you would check those off as well. All right. But if not, just leave them unchecked. Again, doesn't mean you can't accept an offer with that. It's just what we're advertising from listing firm to seller, just making sure we're on the same page. Okay. The firm fee, 6%, and then you need to put in NA in there for the second block. That's what we're charging as a listing firm. This block here should be 90 days. It's just talking about if we have shown the property to another buyer and then our listing expires. If that buyer were to purchase the property within 90 days, then we would still be owed a commission. I'm not caught up on the 90 days there, but that's just typically what we put and what I would recommend you put in there as well. Okay. Here's where we talk about our cooperation with other firms. The only box we should check is the middle one that says 3%, and then make sure we're putting an NA in this block here. This says that we are offering 3% commission to buyer's agents at this point. The top block is for sub-agents. We don't cooperate with sub-agents. That would be if somebody does not have a buyer agency agreement, but they want us to pay them a commission. We're not going to do that. Creates too many problems. If there was some other policy, compensation policy, we would check this block here for that. Okay. But that's the way it should almost always look. All right, the marketing date. So if we're going to do a marketing date on the property, which we typically will, let's say it's 4/16 today, and we're going to do a marketing date of maybe next week because we want to get some pictures taken, get some things put in order at the house. And so maybe we say next Wednesday, the 22nd, is when we're going to go live with it. All right. So it's very important that we do that. If not, you need to have the property on the market within the next 48 hours at a minimum. All right. So if you can't do that, or it's not what the seller and you are agreeing to do, then make sure you have this date checked off. And by the way, a quick note on that, it could be a year out. You could be saying, hey, we want to, especially right now, people might be saying, hey, let's sign now, but we don't want to go out on the market until May 31st. It's perfectly fine. In fact, I know we've got a couple of listings that are exactly that are supposed to go on the market on the 29th of May. So, that's perfectly fine, but it could be farther than that. It could be all the way out to January 1st, 2021. But they want to go ahead and sign with you now because they're leaving the country or whatever the case is, and they're like, hey, just go ahead and get it on the market January 1st and we'll be all set. It's fine. So don't worry about setting that up for as long out as you need to be. Okay. It's a good way to, if you're at the listing and they say, well, we can sign later, we're not ready to go on the market till the end of April. Well, no. Let's sign now. So that gives me a chance to work on all of my paperwork and getting everything ready on photography and all that. But let's go ahead and sign now, saying that we're going to go on the market at the end of April. That way we can get rolling on things. So it's a good way to get them to sign. They are committed by signing this instead of just saying, oh, let's just wait a few weeks then sign. Obviously that could work, but it also leads to potential them not signing. So go ahead and get them to sign as soon as possible. All right. Bottom of page 4 here. Typically, you're going to select all of these items. There will be a sign. We are going to do open houses. There's a listing service, the lockbox. The seller does authorize the lockbox. Advertising on the internet ads. These are all coming from other lawsuits that the state has had to endure. Some people say, well, I didn't realize you were going to put my property on the internet. Yeah, we are. So that's why that's in there. Just a disclosure that your property is going to be up on the internet. Sometimes we don't have a lockbox for whatever reason. Sometimes we don't have a sign because the HOA requirements or things like that. So sometimes you might want to leave those off, but typically this is how it would look with everything checked. Okay. All right, the coming soon part. I really don't like using coming soon. We're seeing more of it right now because of the pandemic issues, and people are wanting to advertise it and saying coming soon, end of April, those kind of things. But generally, I don't like it. But if we are going to do a coming soon, then you would check this box here, and that would allow you to do the coming soon advertising. Okay. Make sure you go over this stuff with your seller. It's important these days. Things like this bright red warning: it may be a crime under federal and state laws to listen to and/or record oral communication through any electronic, mechanical, or other device without consent of a party to that communication. It's important to go through that sort of stuff with our sellers these days. It is so easy and cheap to get video recording, audio recording nowadays. And just make sure you have that discussion with your seller. I'm just of the belief, just stop it. Don't do any of it. But you can do video surveillance without their consent. You just cannot have audio. But again, let's just be reasonable here. I suggest we not do that unless they have some specific concern, or maybe have video in one particular room where they have some jewelry or gun safe or something like that. But otherwise, just make sure they know it cannot have any audio with it. All right. Seller representations. Again, going through this with the seller. Hey, are you guys in a flood zone? You should be checking that yourself as well, but just make sure that you go over this with them. And so typically it's going to be said, no, we're not in a flood zone. No, I don't have flood insurance. Do you have any synthetic stucco on the home? No, we don't. Okay, so we do none or NA in there. Are there any property owners association or homeowners association? If yes, you would check that and you would fill this out. If not, you just simply leave it unchecked. All right, because we're leaving that unchecked, we don't need to put NA in there. All right, only if we check that and we don't know it or something. New construction. If it's a new construction, the property disclosure statement is not required, so we could check that off if that was true. Termite bond. Is there or is there not a termite bond on the property? I always like to tell people, hey, you got a termite bond? And they say, what? What is that? Well, then you don't have one, because if you have one, you would know it because you're paying for it. So typically in our area, there's not a whole lot of those, but it's a question you need to ask and make sure you find out if they do have one, if it is transferable or not. Has the seller owned the property for at least 1 year? Typically that's the case. Have they owned it for less than 1 year? Maybe. Or they do not yet own the property. And sometimes people ask, well, how is that possible? Well, it could be a true flip. It could be something that it's not illegal to do that. You just have to disclose it nowadays. So if the seller has a contract to buy a property, but before they actually close on it, they're advertising it and writing a contract to sell it to someone else, that's where this would come into play. All right, so it's not typical, but it's a true flipping aspect where someone is reselling something before they even own it. So just make sure that we have that covered in there. All right. Receipt of sample forms. You should be sending them all of these forms. You should have those on your desktop so that you can just easily email those to everybody. So yeah, those should be checked. Current liens. You don't necessarily have to have the address and all that in there, but it is very, very important that we find out if it is or is not encumbered by a mortgage. Typically it is, right? And so you can get this information from them and say it's whatever, Bank of America, and the approximate balance. It doesn't have to be the exact, but they say, gosh, I'm not entirely sure, but I believe it's 151,000 is still left on that mortgage, something like that. Okay, great. So that's what we would put in there. All right. This is there to protect you, because if there's something more, if there's another second deed or another lien on the property that they're not telling you about, then that would be on them, because they're signing this saying this is true. So it's a little bit of a protection form for us as the listing agents. Okay. All right. Moving on. Anything here on your specific information, including approximate balances, anything else, any other outstanding liens, you need to put NA or none in there if they don't have any, but make sure you're asking these questions. And we have none in there. Are they under bankruptcy protection? Are they contemplating bankruptcy protection? Yes or no? The reason that's in there is because if they are, they may not legally be able to sell the property. So certainly something we need to know. Access. This happens a lot around here, right? Is there any public Is there a public right-of-way to the property? If there is not, is there a road easement? If there is or is not, that needs to be checked either way. Can't leave those blank. You got to do is or is not. Leases. Is there any current leases on the property? Yes or no? There is or there is not. If there is, then we need to know what that's all about. All right. Any oral leases, things like that. FHA appraisal. Has there been one performed in the last 4 months? Yes or no? Why is that there? Well, because if you get an FHA appraisal, you're not allowed to get a new FHA appraisal for 6 months. So they're just saying, hey, within the last 4 months, have you had one done? Yes or no, so that we're aware of that. Okay. Special assessments. You can just kind of fill that in as none and go over that with the seller and say, is there or is there not any special assessments on the property? If there is, then you need to select that and talk about what that is, because that's going to need to be disclosed. So again, this is a little bit of a covering yourself form for the buyer and seller. All right, fuel tanks. Are there any fuel tanks on the property? Yes or no? If there is, then you need to fill all this out. It's owned by who, location of the tank, above ground, below ground, what kind of fuel there is, etc. Okay. Moving right along. This box here, like it says, seller represents that the seller has the right to convey the property. There's no other circumstances that would prohibit the seller from conveying fee simple marketable title as set forth in the preceding sentence, except as follows. All right, and like it says, you need to put NA in there if there's not. So is there anything that would possibly come into play? Home inspection. They agree or they do not agree to get a home inspection prior to listing the property. That's a really good idea to help sell the property, have the have the home inspection already done. That's a great way to move forward with the buyer, because they already know what's going on, instead of having to I wonder what's wrong with this property. Having the home inspection done prior to listing can be very, very helpful. Again, another document you need to send them, questions and answers on home inspections, that should be sent to them as well. Any additional terms and conditions? Typically, this should read none or NA. So let's put that in there, none or NA. But there could be a condition, it could be something that comes up. An example would be maybe the seller's neighbor is thinking of buying the property, and they say, look, we want to get going on listing this thing, but if my neighbor buys the property, I don't want to have to pay you a commission. Oh, okay. I mean, there's a conversation there. There's a negotiation there. But don't just agree to stuff like that without some sort of timeline. So I would agree to something like that if they're like, yeah, my neighbor's thinking about it, and he may still buy it. I would say that's fine, but I need to put a timeline on it because of my marketing dollars and what I'm doing for the property. So when is he going to let you know for sure? Well, maybe this Saturday he said he would let me know for sure. Okay, great. So I would maybe put in there, if the neighbor buys a property, a commission is not earned if they purchase it by or go under contract by X date. Okay, so something like that. Put a timeline on it. Don't just leave that stuff out there forever. Okay, but any other terms and conditions to the contract, you would just simply write in there. All right, dual agency. Dual agency will be here. Typically, we want them to initial the top line only, not this line and the top line, only the top line. Okay, so that would allow for dual agency. It would allow for you to show the property and anybody from the firm to show the property. So you should be having them initial the top line. We do not initial this unless it's applicable. So only if it's applicable are we actually initialing this. All right. So only have them initial the top lines. We could potentially have them initial these lines here if they do not agree to dual agency, but we need to try to talk them out of that because it really handcuffs us. You're not allowed to show the property. No one from the firm's allowed to show the property. So it's really not the most beneficial way to do that. So have them initial the top line. Okay. All right. So moving on here, page 10 just has the wire fraud warning on it. And moving on to the bottom here, you would have your have them print and sign. You don't have to have them fill out this information, but it could be helpful if you don't have it already. Have them sign that. If they are an entity, an LLC, you would have them sign here, and then of course your information here. Don't just put your signature. This is important that you have the license numbers in here. Okay, so the firm license number is C17887. Firm phone number 828-687-1083. The firm address 802 Fairview Road, Suite 3000, Asheville 28803. And your license number, whatever that is, the date, your phone, your email. Okay, so that's it for the listing agreement. If you got other questions on that, let me know. Let's move on to buyer agency. Okay, and now let's move on to the buyer agency agreement here. So just like listing agreement, a lot of the stuff is the same. The date here is the date you're actually signing the agreement. The buyer name, a little bit different here, like we talked about on the listing agreement. For a married couple, they both need to sign it. For buyers, they don't, right? It's one to buy, two to sell. So we could just have my name on it and not have Beth's name on it. That would be fine. You just need one buyer on there. Now, the other part of that, though, is if you're going to discuss this purchase with anybody involved, then they all need to be on the buyer agency agreement. So let's just say, as an example, Beth and I are buying a property, but we also, I don't know, maybe we're buying a property and my brother, Austin, is going to be involved. He's not going to be actually on the deed or the loan, but he's going to be involved in helping us, advising us on this or something like that. Then that would be a case where he would need to be on the buyer agency agreement, because as the agent, I need to be able to discuss with him what's going on. So sometimes that happens with like mothers and fathers buying a property with their child, and maybe the child isn't financially involved, but they want the child involved as far as looking at homes and being a part of the transaction. So it'd be something like that. Okay, so just kind of be aware of that. But anybody involved in the transaction that you're going to have communication with should sign the buyer agency agreement. Doesn't mean that they have to be on the contract or the loan. It just means that you have the right to discuss with them about the property. Okay, so typically you just have the names like that, and then of course the firm name, Weichert Realtors Unlimited, filled out there as well. Type of property. Now this is improved and unimproved residential. Okay, so that means land. So there's no separate agreement for land. This is the same for houses and land. So improved and unimproved there. If you're looking for commercial, you would check that. If you're looking for other, I don't know what other might be, but it might be something like multi-family homes, something like that. You can have all three of them checked. It's fine. No big deal. All right, so whatever they're looking for, have those checked off. Let's just say it's a typical deal. We're going to look for a house, so we'll do residential, improved, and unimproved. General location, I typically want you to fill out Western North Carolina in here. General location could also be Buncombe County and surrounding counties. Could be that. All right, that's perfectly fine. The idea there is that we're not, since this is a state form and your state license, it's not binding you to work with that buyer out in Charlotte or Raleigh or the Outer Banks or something like that, where you're not an expert and you don't have access to their MLS, things like that. So it's just to make sure we have an idea of the location there. Okay. Now it could also be, that's typical. That's typical right there. Okay. But it could also be that this person has contacted you and said, hey, I want to buy my neighbor's property at 123 Main Street. but I only want to work with you for that one property. So that'd be okay. If that's what it is, that's fine. We could sign a buyer agency agreement and make it just for 123 Main Street. Okay, so you could do that as well. But typically, it would be something like this, where you say Buncombe County and surrounding counties. All right. Then the duration of the agency agreement, it would be from today's date through, typically what I want to do is fill this out for a year out. All right. So 4/16/20 to 4/16/21. All right. So that's typically what I want. That's what I would just fill out without asking anybody. That's what I would do. For some reason, they want that shorter. You can have that discussion, but for a buyer, I mean, maybe if it's at 123 Main Street, yeah, okay, maybe within the next few months we'll know for sure if we're buying that property or not. That may be fine to go ahead and make it a little bit shorter, but for a typical buyer, I'd make it out for a year. Okay. Compensation. We want to put NA in this first block here. That's for the non-refundable retainer fee. If you want to do that with somebody, just talk to me. Something we could do, we can do sometimes, but typically it's not what we're doing. All right. And then our compensation, you should put 3% of the purchase price for homes and 5% of the, let me do that, go back over, of the purchase price for land. Okay. So that's typically how we want to fill this out. Obviously, if you're showing a property ends up being 4% being offered to the buyer agent, then I'm going to want you to amend this or do an agency amendment form and make sure that that is disclosed on how much your compensation is. But this is what we typically would be filling out. This block here is the same as the listing agreement. Typically want that to be 90 days. Same idea. If you're showing them a house and within the next 90 days they want to buy it, then you would be still owed a commission on that. Okay. Moving on here. Not a whole lot on page 2 here. Nothing to fill out for you. Page 3 does have some check marks here for those 3 forms. Again, the offer, sample offer to purchase, questions and answers on home inspections, and then the professional services disclosure. I'm checking off that you're giving all of those to them. Home warranty, we are not collecting a fee on our home warranty, so that would be NA. Additional provisions, again, please make sure this is filled out with none or NA if there's nothing happening. It could be something else, could be some other provision, could be like we talked about on the listing agreement. Maybe they may want to buy their brother's house, and if they buy their brother's house, they don't want to have to pay you a commission on it. Okay, well then again, same thing. I want to put a deadline on that. I want to put a timeline to that. So talk to them. You can put something like that in there. Anything else that's part of the deal, you can put up into that block there. Page 4, you've got your dual agency compensation and your dual agency questions here. So for this part here, you would want them to initial the top lines only, just like we talked about the listing agreement. We don't want them initialing this until we're actually using it. So only these 2 lines you'd have them initialing. Okay. And then compensation would be 6%. Oops. 6% of the purchase price for homes and 10% of the purchase price for land. Okay. All right. So that's typically how we're going to fill that one out. All right. So page 5, you got the wire fraud warning and that sort of thing here. Nothing else really crazy. And then you got page 6, just like we talked about on the other listing agreement here. You need to fill out all the company information. Firm license number 17887, firm phone number, address, your license number. License numbers have to be on contracts, all right? That's a state law, so make sure you have that on there. For the buyers, again, you print, you sign, you need to have them fill out that information as well. All right, so not too tricky, not too tricky at all on this form. All right, let's go back to working with real estate agents real quick. Take a look at that form. And we'll also look really briefly at the amendment form as well. So if we look at working with real estate agents, you can fill this out obviously by hand with the brochure, or of course if you're using the 8.5 by 11 version, this is what it would look like. First 2 pages have nothing on it. Page 1 through 3 is what you should be giving to your buyer client or seller client. And you only check this if you represent the seller. So maybe at an open house or something, you're representing the seller, and then buyer comes in, they start talking about all kinds of stuff. You got to have them sign a working with real estate agents. You would want to have this checked off, and you initial this as well. But if you are going to represent the buyer, then you would leave that unchecked. You'd fill out your name, right, your license number, firm name, and today's date. Okay? Today's date, and you're good to go. All right, but again, you would check these off if you represent the seller and you're giving this to the buyer. All right, buyer needs to print and sign here. You put your information in there, the date of today's date, and same thing here. Then again, if you represent the seller, then you check this off, and the buyer would initial this. The other page, you're initialing it. This one, the buyer's initialing it. They understand that you represent the seller. Which, by the way, if they want to be unrepresented and they want to write an offer, but they're unrepresented, they don't have another buyer, they don't want to work with you as an agent, the only form you need them to sign is this, saying that, hey, I've told you I'm representing the seller. They initial that, yeah, I agree, and that's all you would have them to sign. All right, so that's all you got to do to fill out working with real estate agents. Really simple. We'll talk about presenting it a little bit later. But basically, that's all you got to go through. And the last document I want to go over today is the actual agency agreement renewal and amendment form. So this form is 1 page here. You can use this to amend the listing agreements, buyer agency agreements. When you're using this form, the dated part is the date of the agency agreement or the listing agreement, not today's date, but the date that was signed. So it says dated. The extra D there means the date that was signed, okay? Between the client, what's the client name, the firm name, property address, MLS number. If it's for a listing agreement, you should have those in there. If it's buyer agency agreement, you don't have to fill that out. Just put NA in there. You have the renewal. If you're extending the buyer agency agreement, extending the listing agreement, that would be in there. Changing the price from X to X, or other amendments. Now, this is a contract between the client and the firm, so we can fill out whatever we need to in this blank here. So that might be a time when you can fill out the compensation, say, hey, buyer agency agreement compensation has changed from 3% to 2.5% or 3% to 4%, something like that, and have the client sign, you sign it, and we're good to go. All right. But always use this form anytime you got to change something on the listing agreement, buyer agency agreement, especially on listing agreements where you're changing price from you're listed at 305 and you're changing it to 295. Use this form every time you change it. Okay. So make sure we're using that as well. All right. So that's class today on agency agreements. I hope it's helpful, and see you next time.